The promise made. The golden afternoon sunlight streamed through the windows of Maplewood Elementary, casting warm patterns on the wooden floors. The smell of fresh crayons and glue filled the air as 26 kindergartners sat at their tiny desks, some deep in concentration while others whispered and giggled amongst themselves. At a corner table, Emma Dawson sat alone, her small hands clenched into fists. Her lower lip jutted out, a telltale sign that she was trying her best not to cry. The blue crayon she had been gripping so tightly had snapped in half, the broken piece now lying uselessly on her worksheet. She had been drawing a picture of her family, but now it was ruined. Across the room, Liam Carter noticed immediately. He always noticed Emma. Liam was the kind of boy who never sat still. He was constantly wiggling in his seat, tapping his pencil, or making sound effects under his breath. His sneakers were perpetually untied, his hair was always slightly messy, and there was always some new bruise on his knee from climbing things he wasn't supposed to. But despite all his boundless energy, he had an unusual focus when it came to Emma. He saw her staring at the broken crayon, her small shoulders tense, her expression carefully guarded. He knew she wouldn't ask for help. She never did. Without a second thought, Liam jumped up from his seat, grabbed his own blue crayon, and marched over to her. "Here," he said, placing it on her desk. His voice was bright and matter-of-fact, as if she had no choice but to take it. Emma didn't look up. "I don't need help," she mumbled, folding her arms. Liam just grinned. "That's okay," he said cheerfully. "I still want to help anyway." Their teacher, Mrs. Nolan, glanced up from her desk, her lips twitching in amusement. She had seen this scene play out many times before. Liam, the energetic troublemaker, always hovering around the quiet, serious Emma like a persistent little guardian. Emma huffed but took the crayon, her fingers curling around it almost reluctantly. She didn't say thank you. She wasn't good at that. But she used it, and that was enough for Liam. During lunchtime, the school cafeteria buzzed with laughter and the sound of plastic trays clattering. Emma sat at the end of the table, her lunchbox meticulously arranged. Apple slices in one compartment, a sandwich cut into triangles in another, and a tiny cup of yogurt on the side. She ate carefully, taking small, neat bites. But when she reached for her juice box, her elbow knocked it over. The bright red fruit punch spilled across the table, seeping into her neatly folded napkin, creeping toward her sandwich. Emma's breath hitched. She hated messes, hated accidents. Before she could even move, Liam was already there, napkins in hand, mopping up the spill like a firefighter responding to an emergency. "Got it," he declared, wadding up the soaked napkins. Then, without hesitation, he pulled out his own juice box and placed it in front of her. Emma stared at it. "But that's yours," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Liam just shrugged. "I like milk better anyway." That was a lie. Everyone knew Liam loved fruit punch, but he said it so easily that Emma didn't argue. Across the cafeteria, a boy named Kyle Patterson smirked. "Look," he called loudly to his group of friends. "Liam's giving Emma his juice again. What's next? He gonna share his cookies too." The boys at Kyle's table snickered. Liam, however, didn't seem the least bit embarrassed. Instead, he stood up taller and declared, "I'm gonna marry her someday, so I gotta take care of her." A ripple of giggles and mockery swept through the cafeteria. Emma's face turned a deep shade of pink. Kyle cackled. "Oh yeah, you're gonna marry Miss No-Talking Dawson." Emma ducked her head, her hands clenched into fists again. But Liam? He wasn't the least bit ashamed. Instead, he grinned wider. "Yeah, and she's gonna be the smartest, coolest girl ever." The teasing only worsened after that, but Liam didn't seem to care. He kept sitting with Emma, kept sharing his snacks, kept defending her, no matter how much she rolled her eyes or muttered that she didn't need his help. And despite herself, Emma never told him to stop. The last day. The day Emma's world changed was a stormy October afternoon. The sky was overcast, thick with dark clouds, and the air smelled of rain and fallen leaves. She had just arrived at school when she saw her mother standing outside her classroom. Emma froze. Her mother never came to school during the day. She was always at work, dressed in her sleek business suits, always busy, always checking her watch. Mrs. Dawson gave Emma a soft, too gentle smile. "Sweetheart," she said, crouching down to Emma's level. "Come here for a second." Something felt wrong. Emma could feel it in her chest, like a stone pressing against her ribs. Liam, who had been tying his untied shoelace nearby, noticed immediately. He straightened, eyes sharp with concern. Mrs. Dawson placed a hand on Emma's shoulder. "We're moving, honey. Today." Emma stopped breathing. "Moving," she whispered. "To the city. Your dad got the job." Emma's mind whirled. "No," she said, shaking her head. "No, I don't want to." "I know, sweetheart." Her mother's voice was gentle but firm. "But we don't have a choice." Liam was suddenly right there. "What?" he blurted out, looking at Emma, then at her mother. "She can't move. She lives here." Mrs. Dawson sighed. "I'm sorry, Liam." But Liam wasn't listening. His wide, panic-filled eyes were locked on Emma. "You can't," he insisted. "You can't leave." Emma's throat felt tight, her fingers curling into the fabric of her sweater. Liam ripped something from his wrist, the friendship bracelet he'd made her weeks ago, woven with blue and white threads. "Here," he said, shoving it into her hands. "Take it, so you don't forget." Emma stared at it. "Liam, But before she could say anything, her mother gently tugged her away. As Emma was led toward the car, she turned one last time. Liam was standing on the curb, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "You promised," he shouted after her. "We promised." Then, the car door closed, and as the vehicle pulled away, Liam Carter became a blur in the rain. The distance between us. The city was louder than Emma had expected. Even at 6 years old, she had thought she understood noise. She had been used to the hum of her small suburban town, the distant sound of a lawnmower on a Saturday morning, the occasional bark of a neighbor's dog, the familiar ring of the ice cream truck in the summer. But the city was different. It was constant. Cars honking, people shouting, sirens wailing. It never truly slept. She hated it. Emma sat by the large apartment window, staring out at the unfamiliar skyline. The towering buildings, the fast-moving people, they all seemed so detached. Everything was in motion, but none of it included her. Her fingers played with the friendship bracelet Liam had given her. The blue and white threads were already fraying, but she didn't dare take it off. She missed him. She hated admitting it, even to herself. She hadn't cried when they left. She had refused to cry. But every night, lying in her new bed in this unfamiliar apartment, she could still hear his voice. "We promised." She wished she had said something back. Years passed, and life moved forward. Emma Dawson became exactly what her parents wanted her to be. She was smart, organized, focused. She got straight A's, never skipped school, never gave her parents a reason to worry. By middle school, she had mastered the art of being untouchable. She didn't let people get too close. She had friends, but not the kind who truly knew her. She went to sleepovers, but never shared anything deeper than what was expected. And she never mentioned Liam. It was easier that way. When she turned 13, she took off the friendship bracelet for the first time. She placed it in the small wooden memory box her mother had given her. She didn't throw it away. She couldn't, but she told herself it was time to let go. Liam Carter learned to be angry. In the years after Emma left, Liam changed. He didn't mean to. It just happened. At first, he had believed that she would come back. For weeks after she moved, he kept looking for her at school, expecting to see her walk into the classroom, adjusting the glasses she had always been so self-conscious about. He refused to believe she was gone for good. But days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. Months turned into years. And Emma never came back. Liam stopped trying so hard after that. He still played sports, still cracked jokes, still acted like nothing bothered him. But something had shifted. Teachers noticed it. "You're not focusing, Liam. Your grades are slipping, Liam. You have so much potential, Liam." But he didn't care. By the time he reached high school, he had perfected the art of shrugging things off. Nothing mattered. Not really. His teachers saw wasted potential. His mother saw a boy who had lost his spark. His friends saw a guy who never let anything get to him. But what they didn't see, what no one saw, was the box buried deep under his bed, tucked away beneath old baseball jerseys and forgotten notebooks. Inside it, wrapped carefully in an old t-shirt, was a blue and white friendship bracelet. Frayed at the edges, still intact. Still a broken promise. Different lives, same empty spaces. Emma and Liam grew up. They became two people who no longer existed in each other's worlds. Emma threw herself into her studies. Liam threw himself into not caring. She graduated at the top of her class. He barely passed, but made it through. She went to law school. He packed his bags and left town with a guitar slung over his shoulder. Emma built a future that was stable, structured, predictable. Liam built a future that was unplanned, chaotic, and full of music. And yet, somewhere in the quiet moments of their lives, they still thought about each other. A song on the radio, a familiar scent, a certain shade of blue. But neither of them reached out. Because what was the point? They weren't kids anymore. That promise had been made in kindergarten. And everyone knows that childhood promises don't last. A chance encounter, years later. It had been nearly 20 years since Emma had last seen Liam. She hadn't thought about him in a long time. Not really. Not until that night. The night that changed everything. Emma Dawson was standing in the middle of an elegant ballroom, surrounded by people dressed in tailored suits and designer dresses. She should have felt at home here. She didn't. Her fiancé, Ryan Davenport, was busy schmoozing investors, his hand placed lightly on the small of her back, a possessive gesture rather than a loving one. Emma's smile was polished and perfect. She had learned to fake it well. "This is my fiancé, Emma," Ryan was saying, his tone proud but detached. "She's one of the top lawyers at Morrison & Blake." Emma barely registered the handshake, the polite laughter. Her mind was elsewhere. Something felt off tonight. She couldn't quite explain it. And then she heard it. Music. Not the polished, orchestrated kind meant for ballroom dancing. No. This was something else. Something raw. Something familiar. Her head turned instinctively toward the small stage set up at the far end of the room. A man was playing the guitar, his fingers moving across the frets with practiced ease. His voice was deep, smooth, but laced with something achingly real. Emma's heart stopped. It couldn't be. Could it? The musician looked up mid-song. Their eyes met. Emma's breath caught. And across the crowded ballroom, Liam Carter stared back at her. The moment that changed everything. Liam froze. The lyrics died on his lips. The crowd blurred. Because standing there, in a designer dress, her hair swept up in a way that made her look like she had stepped out of a magazine, was Emma Dawson. For a moment, neither of them moved. Neither of them breathed. Then, someone in the audience cleared their throat. The spell was broken. Liam tore his gaze away and continued playing, but his fingers trembled slightly against the strings. Emma's heart pounded so hard, she thought the entire room could hear it. She had spent years pretending the past didn't matter, but in a single glance she realized. It had never stopped mattering. The weight of the past. The ballroom's golden lights felt suddenly too bright. The music continued, but to Emma, it was only white noise. She wasn't sure how long she stood there, locked in a silent stare with Liam Carter, but her entire world had shrunk to this moment. 1,000 memories. half forgotten, buried deep, ignored for years, came rushing back at once. The boy who had always noticed her, the boy who had defended her, shared his crayons, given her his juice box, and most of all, promised to marry her. And now, here he was. A man, but not just any man. The one man she never truly let go of. She barely registered Ryan's voice beside her. Emma. His hand, warm and firm, touched her arm, anchoring her to the present. "Did you hear what I said?" Ryan asked, his brows furrowed slightly, a faint irritation creeping into his polished tone. "Thompson wants to introduce you to his wife. We should." But Emma wasn't listening. Liam was still watching her, and despite the years, despite the distance, despite everything, she saw it: recognition, shock, and something dangerously close to longing. Then, just like that, he looked away. He focused back on his guitar, his jaw tight, his expression unreadable. Emma's heart dropped. The moment, whatever it was, had passed. And suddenly, she felt like a fool. The pull of the past. Emma barely made it through the rest of the evening. She smiled when necessary. She nodded at the right moments. She played her part. The perfect fiancé. The brilliant lawyer. The composed woman who had her life together. But her mind wasn't here. It was across the ballroom, lingering on the man who had once been her best friend. Liam had finished his set not long after their brief, silent encounter. Emma noticed he never once looked at her again. Not even when he packed up his guitar case. Not when he exchanged words with his bandmates. Not when he left the ballroom without a glance in her direction. She should have let it go. She should have forgotten it. Just another face from the past. Just another reminder of a childhood that no longer existed. But as Ryan talked about wedding venues and investment portfolios, Emma found herself barely breathing. Because for the first time in years, she wanted something she couldn't explain. And she was terrified of what that meant. An unfinished conversation. It was past midnight when Emma stepped out onto the hotel's rooftop terrace, the city lights stretching endlessly before her. The air was cool, crisp, but it did nothing to calm the storm inside her. She had made a mistake. She shouldn't have come up here. But when she had excused herself from the after-party, claiming exhaustion, her feet had carried her somewhere else. Somewhere she hadn't admitted she needed to go. And now, standing under the soft glow of fairy lights, she wasn't alone. Liam was there, leaning against the railing, cigarette in hand, looking out at the skyline like he belonged nowhere and everywhere at the same time. Emma's stomach tightened. She hadn't seen him smoke before. Maybe it was new. Maybe it wasn't. But there was something about it. The way he flicked the ash away absent-mindedly. The way the soft glow of the ember lit up his face, that made her ache. She almost turned back. Almost. But before she could, Liam spoke. "I wondered if you'd come." His voice was the same. Maybe deeper, rougher, but undeniably his. Emma took a shaky breath, stepping forward. "I wasn't sure I would." Liam chuckled, shaking his head. "Still indecisive, huh?" Emma frowned. "I was never indecisive." His eyes flicked toward her, just for a second. "You were about us." The words hit her like a slap. And suddenly, it wasn't 20 years later. It was that day. The day she had left. The day Liam had stood on the curb in the rain, shouting after her, begging her to stay. And she had said nothing. Emma swallowed hard. "Liam, He exhaled slowly, tossing the cigarette to the ground and crushing it with his heel. "Don't," he said. The single word carried years of weight. Emma felt her chest tighten. "What happened to you?" she asked, her voice quieter than she meant it to be. Liam let out a bitter laugh. "What happened to me?" He ran a hand through his hair, his frustration barely contained. "That's a funny question, coming from the girl who disappeared without a word." "I was a kid, Liam," Emma snapped, surprising even herself. "I didn't have a choice. You had a choice every day after that. Liam shot back. His voice was still low, controlled, but there was something underneath it, something raw. Emma sucked in a sharp breath. Because he was right. She had never reached out. Not when she was 10. Not when she was 15. Not when she was 18 and moving back to the same state for college. Not when she had spent nights staring at her phone, wondering what would happen if she looked him up. She had told herself that he had forgotten, that it was just childhood, that he had moved on. But now, facing him after all these years, she realized she had been lying to herself. Liam Carter had never been someone she could just forget. "Why are you here, Emma?" His voice was quieter now, more controlled, more careful. She didn't know how to answer. To say she had wanted to see him again. To say she had felt something shift inside her the moment their eyes met. To say that for the first time in years, she wasn't sure if she was making the right choices. She swallowed hard. "I don't know." Liam's jaw tensed. He nodded once, almost as if he had expected that answer. "Then you should go." It was a simple statement, a dismissal. But Emma heard everything underneath it. And for the first time in her life, she didn't want to walk away. The things we never say. The city skyline stretched behind them, a sea of lights flickering like distant stars. Emma felt out of place on the rooftop terrace, her expensive gown a stark contrast to the raw emotions unraveling inside her. Liam had told her to go. She should have. She should have turned, walked away, and returned to the life she had built. But her feet wouldn't move. Her heart pounded in her chest as she stared at him, the man who had once been the most important person in her world, the boy who had promised her forever, even when they were too young to understand what that meant. And now he was telling her to leave, just like she had left him. No. Emma took a deep breath, steadying herself. "I don't want to go," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Liam's posture stiffened. His fingers curled into fists at his sides before he let out a sharp breath, turning toward her. "You don't get to say that now," he muttered. "Not after 20 years. Emma flinched. The anger in his voice wasn't loud, but it was there, just beneath the surface, restrained but unmistakable. He was hurt, and she was the reason why. "I know," she admitted, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "I know I should have reached out. I should have written. I should have." "Yeah," Liam interrupted, laughing bitterly. "You should have." Emma swallowed hard. This was harder than she had expected. She had spent years pretending Liam was just a part of her childhood, a story from her past that didn't need revisiting. But standing here now, with the weight of his disappointment pressing against her, she realized how much she had been lying to herself. "I didn't forget you," she said softly. Liam let out a scoff, shaking his head. "That's a nice thought, Emma. But memories don't mean anything if you don't act on them." She exhaled sharply. "And what about you?" Liam's head snapped up. Emma took a step closer. "You talk like I was the only one who let this go. But I never heard from you, either." Liam's expression darkened. "I was 6 years old when you left, Emma." "I wasn't," she shot back. "I was 16, then 18, then 22, and I still didn't hear from you." Liam fell silent. His jaw clenched, and for a long moment, he didn't speak. Then, finally, softly, "I did reach out." Emma felt the ground shift beneath her. "What?" she whispered. Liam exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "When I was 12, I sent a letter to your old house. It got sent back. Returned to sender." Emma felt her stomach drop. She hadn't known. Liam continued, his voice raw. "When I was 14, I emailed the last address I had for you. It bounced." He let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "When I was 16, I found your school's number. I almost called." Emma's breath caught. "But I didn't," he admitted, "because by then, I figured you had already moved on." Her heart ached. He had tried. And she had never known. Emma's fingers curled around the fabric of her dress. "Liam," she started, but the words died in her throat. Because what could she say? That she had spent years pretending he didn't matter. That she had shoved every memory of him into a box and locked it away because it was easier than admitting she missed him. Liam shook his head, stepping back. "I can't do this," he said. "Do what?" Emma whispered. "This," he gestured between them. "This conversation. This thing where you come back into my life and expect me to just—" He stopped, exhaling roughly. "I don't know what you want from me, Emma." Emma's throat tightened. "I don't know either," she admitted. "I just know I don't want to leave things like this." Liam let out a slow breath, staring at her for a long moment. Then, reluctantly, softly, "I'm playing at a cafe tomorrow night." Emma blinked. Liam looked away, almost like he regretted saying it. "If you want to talk," he said, voice tight, "meet me there." Then, before she could respond, he turned and walked away, leaving her standing there, with her heart racing, and the past finally catching up to her. The cafe that changed everything. The next night, Emma found herself outside a small cafe. It wasn't like the fancy venues Ryan took her to. There was no valet parking, no marble floors or crystal chandeliers. But somehow it felt more real. The sign read, "Melody Corner Cafe." She had spent the entire day telling herself she shouldn't come. That it didn't matter. That Liam Carter was her past, and she was engaged to someone else. But her heart had made the decision before her mind could catch up. So now she was here, waiting. She stepped inside, the scent of fresh coffee filling the air. The cafe was small, cozy, warm lighting, mismatched chairs, the quiet hum of conversation. And there, on a tiny stage, Liam was playing. Emma froze. The moment his voice filled the room, everything else disappeared. The song was new. But the words were familiar. "We were kids making promises on playground swings. We didn't know forever, but we knew what love means. Then the years took you somewhere I couldn't follow. Left me waiting with memories too heavy to swallow." Emma's breath hitched, because this song was about her. And the moment Liam's eyes found hers in the crowd, she knew he had never really let go either. The moment of truth. The cafe was warm and alive with conversation, but Emma felt frozen in place. Liam's voice wrapped around her like a memory, raw, familiar, and achingly real. "We were kids making promises on playground swings. We didn't know forever, but we knew what love means. Then the years took you somewhere I couldn't follow. Left me waiting with memories too heavy to swallow." Emma's chest tightened. She knew what this song meant, who it was about. Liam's fingers moved effortlessly across the guitar strings, but his eyes, his sharp, stormy eyes, were locked onto hers. And suddenly, Emma wasn't here. She was 6 years old again, sitting at a tiny desk, scowling at a broken crayon. She was 10, staring out of a moving car, watching Liam disappear in the rain. She was 16, lying awake in bed, thinking about reaching out, but never finding the courage. And now she was 26, standing in a cafe, realizing that no matter how far she had run, some part of her had always been waiting to find her way back. The song ended, and for a long moment there was silence. Then a few soft claps. Muted applause. But Liam wasn't paying attention. His guitar still rested on his lap, his fingers still poised on the strings. But he wasn't moving. He was watching her, and Emma couldn't look away. A conversation 10 years too late. Liam didn't approach her. He finished his set, packed up his guitar, and made his way toward the door. Emma hesitated for half a second, just half a second, but then she was moving. She pushed through the cafe, weaving between tables, following him outside. The night air was crisp, the city alive with its usual hum of traffic and distant sirens. Liam stood near the curb, lighting a cigarette, his expression calm, unreadable. Emma crossed her arms. You smoke now. Liam exhaled slowly. Sometimes, a beat of silence stretched between them. Then, that song, Emma said. Liam took another slow drag. What about it? You wrote it about. You? Liam finished, his voice unapologetic. Yeah. Emma sucked in a breath. She didn't know what to say to that. Because what could she say? I'm sorry. I didn't know. I never stopped thinking about you either. Liam looked at her, eyes sharp beneath the glow of the streetlight. You didn't have to come. Emma clenched her hands into fists. Then why did you invite me? Liam hesitated. And that was all the answer she needed. Because he wanted her here. Even if he was mad. Even if he hated her a little for how things had ended. He still wanted her here. A question she couldn't ignore. Emma took a slow breath. Why didn't you ever move on? She asked softly. Liam's jaw tightened. I tried, he admitted. But it turns out you don't just move on from your best friend. You don't just wake up one day and stop wondering what could have been. Emma's heart ached. I wasn't sure you remembered me, she admitted. Liam let out a short, humorless laugh. Emma, I spent years writing songs about you. You don't forget someone like that. She swallowed hard. And now? Liam exhaled, flicking his cigarette onto the pavement and grinding it under his boot. Now, he echoed, voice rough. Now you're engaged to someone else. Emma's stomach dropped. Because that was it, wasn't it? She had spent so long pushing Liam away, convincing herself he was part of a life she had outgrown. But now she was standing here, face to face with him, knowing that no matter how much she had tried to fit into the life she had built, it wasn't the one she wanted. Liam's voice softened. What do you want, Emma? The question was quiet. Simple. But it shook her to her core. Because she didn't know how to answer. Not yet. An ultimatum she never expected. Emma opened her mouth. But before she could speak, a familiar voice cut through the night. There you are. Her stomach twisted. Ryan. He stood near the entrance of the cafe, his expression cool, composed. But Emma knew that look. He was angry. Ryan never raised his voice. He never yelled. But when he was mad, his eyes went sharp, his jaw went tight, and his voice turned cold. Emma felt Liam stiffen beside her. Ryan's gaze flicked between them, assessing the situation. Then, slowly, he stepped forward. I've been looking for you, he said, forcing a smile. Emma's throat went dry. I didn't realize I needed permission to go out, she said quietly. Ryan chuckled. Of course not, sweetheart, but disappearing in the middle of a party, leaving your fiancé without a word. His smile was tight. You have to understand how that looks. Emma felt trapped. Like a bird in a cage she hadn't realized she was in until now. Ryan turned his attention to Liam. You must be the musician, he said, offering a polite hand. Emma's old friend. Liam didn't move. He didn't shake Ryan's hand, didn't smile, didn't say a single word. The tension was thick. Ryan lowered his hand, still smiling. Then he looked at Emma. Let's go home. It wasn't a request. It was an expectation. And suddenly, standing there, caught between the man she was supposed to marry and the boy who had once been her world, Emma realized something. This moment wasn't just about Liam. It was about her. About what she wanted. About whether she was finally brave enough to choose herself. Liam must have seen something in her expression, because his gaze softened just slightly. You don't have to go with him, Liam said quietly. Ryan's jaw tensed. Emma's pulse pounded. And she realized, this was it. This was the moment where she had to make a choice. The choice that changed everything. Emma's heart pounded as she stood between two men, two versions of her life. Ryan, with his polished suit, sharp eyes, and controlled demeanor, represented security, success, stability. Liam, with his calloused hands, raw voice, and storm-filled gaze, represented something unspoken, something real. And now she was standing in the middle of the street, with both of them waiting for her to decide. Ryan's fingers twitched slightly at his side, his jaw tight. He never lost his composure, never let his emotions slip. But Emma knew him. She could see the irritation beneath his cool exterior. Liam, on the other hand, stood completely still. He wasn't pushing her to choose him. He was just there, watching, waiting. And maybe that's why it terrified her so much. Because Liam wasn't fighting for her, not in the way she had expected. He wasn't pleading, wasn't grabbing her hand, wasn't telling her all the reasons she should stay. Because he had already done that once. And she had left him anyway. A cold wind swept through the street, but Emma barely felt it. All she could hear was Liam's voice from the rooftop the night before. "I don't know what you want from me, Emma." And then his voice tonight, so much softer, so much more dangerous. "You don't have to go with him." It was the first time in years someone had reminded her that she had a choice. Her whole life had been built around expectations. Go to law school, build a perfect career, marry the right man. She had followed the script so perfectly that she had never stopped to ask herself, "What do I want?" Ryan took a step closer. "Emma," he said, his voice smooth, practiced. "Let's not make a scene. We can talk about this at home." It was an order disguised as reassurance. And for the first time, Emma recognized it for what it was. A pattern. Ryan had always made her feel like she was in control, while quietly, subtly, taking that control away. And suddenly, she couldn't breathe. Because she saw it so clearly now. She had been choosing safety over happiness, security over love. Ryan was the logical choice, the easy choice, the one that made sense on paper. But Liam was the choice she never let herself consider. Until now, her fingers trembled at her sides. She had never been reckless, never made impulsive decisions. But for the first time in her life, she wanted to. She took a slow step back, not toward Ryan, toward Liam. Ryan's smile froze. "Emma," he said, warning creeping into his voice now. "Don't do this." She looked at him, at the man she almost married, the man she had tried to love. And she realized, with a strange kind of sadness, she had never been in love with him. Not really. Not the way she had been with Liam. Not the way she still was. Ryan's face hardened. "This is ridiculous. You're throwing away everything." "I don't love you," Emma said, her voice barely above a whisper. The words hung in the air, irreversible. Ryan blinked. For the first time, he looked genuinely caught off guard. "What?" he said. Emma exhaled slowly, steadier now. "I don't love you," she repeated, her voice clearer this time. "And I don't think I ever really did." Ryan's mouth opened slightly, as if searching for the right argument. But there was nothing left to say. Emma had made her choice, and for the first time in 20 years, it was the right one. Ryan let out a soft, humorless laugh, shaking his head. Then he looked at Liam. "You win," he muttered, his voice dripping with resentment. But Liam didn't smile, because this wasn't about winning. It never had been. Ryan took one last look at Emma. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away. And just like that, her old life was gone. What now? The street fell into silence. Emma turned slowly, her pulse still racing. Liam was staring at her like he wasn't sure if this was real. Like he had spent so many years imagining this moment, and now that it was happening, he didn't know what to do with it. Emma swallowed hard. "Say something." Liam blinked, letting out a slow breath. Then, softly, "I didn't think you'd actually do it." Emma let out a breathless laugh. "Neither did I." Liam studied her, his expression still unreadable. And then, finally, he smiled. Not a big, triumphant grin. Not some cocky, victorious smirk, just a small, relieved smile. And it was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. Emma took another step toward him. Liam. He raised an eyebrow. Yeah. Her heart was pounding again. Because this moment, it was terrifying. Not because she was afraid she had made a mistake, but because for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid of what came next. So she did what she should have done years ago. She kissed him. And this time, she wasn't too late. The love we choose. The moment Emma kissed Liam, the world disappeared. The city noise faded. The streetlights blurred. The past, the regrets, the 20 years of silence, none of it mattered. Because right now, in this moment, she was exactly where she was meant to be. Liam's lips were warm against hers, tentative at first, as if he wasn't sure this was real. As if he thought she might change her mind at any second. But when she deepened the kiss, when she clutched the front of his jacket like she was afraid he'd disappear, he gave in. His hand settled on her waist, pulling her closer. Closer than she had ever been to anything real in her life. And it wasn't just a kiss. It was everything they had never said. Every unsent letter, every missed moment. Every second they had spent pretending the past didn't matter. But it did. And it always would. When they finally pulled apart, Emma was breathless. Liam was staring at her, his chest rising and falling, his hand still gripping her waist like he was afraid to let go. Then, softly, "You sure about this?" Emma let out a breathless laugh. "For the first time in my life." "Yeah." Liam exhaled, pressing his forehead against hers. "God, you have no idea how long I've wanted to hear that." Emma smiled. 20 years. Liam chuckled. At least. The morning after, Emma woke up to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar curtains. For half a second, she forgot where she was. Then, she turned over and saw Liam Carter sleeping beside her, and everything came rushing back. Last night, leaving Ryan, choosing Liam, choosing herself. Her heart fluttered in her chest. She had never been the kind of person to be reckless, to throw away her perfectly built life on a whim. But this wasn't reckless. This was right. She shifted slightly, trying to sit up, but Liam stirred beside her, letting out a soft groan. 5 more minutes, he murmured, voice husky from sleep. Emma smiled, brushing her fingers through his messy hair. "Are you really this bad at waking up?" Liam cracked one eye open. "I'm a musician. Mornings don't exist in my world." Emma laughed. And it felt so natural, so easy, like they had been doing this forever. Liam reached for her, pulling her back down. She let him. Because for once, she wasn't in a rush to be anywhere else. A reality check. But reality had a way of catching up. By mid-morning, Emma's phone was blowing up. Missed calls. Voicemails. Texts. "Ryan, Emma, we need to talk." "Ryan, you made a mistake. We both know it." "Ryan, call me back." Her stomach twisted. She knew this would happen. She had walked away from the life she had built, the one that had been perfectly structured, organized, planned. And Ryan, he wasn't the type to just let that go. Liam must have seen the look on her face, because he set down his coffee mug and leaned against the kitchen counter. "You okay?" Emma exhaled. "Ryan's not taking it well." Liam's jaw tensed. "Do you need to see him?" he asked carefully, measuring his words. Emma hesitated. She didn't owe Ryan anything. But she also knew he wouldn't stop until he got closure. And if she wanted to start something real with Liam, she had to end things the right way first. "I think I do," she admitted. Liam nodded. But Emma saw the way his fingers curled slightly against the counter. She stepped closer, pressing a soft kiss to his jaw. "I'm not going back to him, Liam." Liam exhaled, relaxing slightly. "Yeah, I know." But Emma could tell he was still bracing himself. because they might have spent last night in each other's arms, but history wasn't rewritten in a single moment. There was still so much left to figure out. Closure. Ryan agreed to meet her at a quiet cafe, one far from their usual high-end restaurants and networking spots. Emma arrived first, her nerves twisting inside her. Not because she was doubting herself, but because she knew Ryan. She knew how he operated. And sure enough, when he walked in, he was calm, collected, perfectly in control. Like nothing had changed. Like he wasn't about to fight for her, but for his pride. He sat across from her, adjusting the cuff of his expensive suit. "You look good," he said smoothly. Emma didn't return the compliment. "I wanted to do this face to face," she said instead. "Because I respect you, Ryan. But I also need you to understand. This is final." Ryan smiled, but it wasn't a real one. "You think this is a mistake," he said, like it was a fact. Emma shook her head. "No. I think staying with you would have been a mistake." Ryan's fingers tightened around his coffee cup, but his voice stayed smooth. "You don't have to do this, Emma. We had plans. A life." Emma sighed. "But it wasn't mine. It was yours." Ryan let out a slow breath. Then, ***, for the first time in their relationship. ***, he dropped the act. "You're really choosing him?" he asked. Emma didn't hesitate. "Yes." Ryan studied her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he leaned back in his chair. "You'll regret this," he said, his voice still controlled. But Emma saw it, the flicker of loss in his eyes. She felt a pang of guilt. Not because she had chosen wrong, but because she had never really loved him the way he had wanted her to. Emma reached into her bag, pulled out the engagement ring, and set it on the table. "Goodbye, Ryan." And just like that, she walked away. For good. A new beginning. That evening, Emma sat on Liam's rooftop, wrapped in his old sweatshirt, watching the sun set over the city. It was different from the skyline she had built her life in. Less polished. More real. Liam sat beside her, playing absently with the strings of his guitar. "I talked to Ryan," she said softly. Liam looked up. "How'd that go?" Emma exhaled. "Exactly how I expected." Liam smirked. "Did he try to win you back with a business proposal?" Emma laughed. "Almost." Liam grinned, but then his expression turned serious. "So, what now?" he asked. Emma paused. Because for the first time in forever, she didn't have an answer. And maybe that was okay. "I don't know," she admitted, smiling. "But for once, I don't need to have it all figured out." Liam studied her, then slowly reached into his pocket. He pulled out something small, something old. Emma's breath caught. The friendship bracelet. Frayed. Worn. Still intact. "You kept it," she whispered. Liam nodded, twirling it between his fingers. "Always." Emma swallowed the lump in her throat. She reached out, brushing her fingers over the familiar threads. Then, carefully, Liam tied it back around her wrist. Emma looked at him, and for the first time in her life, she knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. With him, where she had always belonged. And this time, she wasn't leaving.